Now, you might have heard of this organization, Origins of Hamas. Around this time, so a couple of years around this time, we see Hamas is formed in Gaza, an offshoot of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. It was previously an organization that was, in essence, dealing with community projects and from the mosques there. It wasn't a formal political party that it would become later, nor with its militant wing, the Izzadin al-Qassam Brigade. But it gets formed in Gaza. Initially, Israel doesn't do anything to Hamas, and even views it as a potentially useful rival to its main enemy, Fatah.
Divide and conquer, I suppose.
Indeed. Yeah, indeed.
Do we know what Hamas stands for? Obviously, is it an acronym, is it, in Arabic?
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, it's basically the harakat for, the front or kind of method for fighting and resistance, basically, if you were to give a translation, a rough translation. Okay. But it's an acronym, basically.
So it's a resistance organization, a resistance against occupation. Okay.
I mean, that's what it is basically arguing it is doing. Like the PLO, they are both arguing that they are resistance organizations, right? But it views itself as the movement for Islamic resistance, I suppose, what the translation of it stands for. And it's kind of, at first, it doesn't have a military force. It's just a Islamically based. So it's trying to use Islam, not secular.
Because PLO is secular, yeah, okay, yeah. So this is part of the global resurgence of Islam, isn't it, in a way, moving away from Arab nationalism, secularism, to a more Islamic-based conception of civil society, and okay.
Yeah. So it's more Islamically based, but basically, it's an acronym. The vowels aren't in the Arabic. It's just HMS. So Harakat al-Muqawama Islamiyya. So a movement for an Islamic resistance or insurgency or what have you. So it's one of the first, you could say, major players that arises amongst the Palestinians, which is not based on secular nationalism. It's based on, ostensibly, it claims it's based on an Islamic premise for the liberation of Palestine, to create an Islamic state, not to create a secular republic or what have you. So that all makes it different, and Israel views it as an interesting counterpoint to Fatah, and the use of religion against Fatah and the PLO to undermine its main rival at that point in time. It then later on formed a military wing called the Izzadin al-Qassam Brigade, which remains its military wing today. So any military operations done by Hamas is done by that wing. Hamas is meant to be a political party, at least it will declare itself to be a political party, and its militant operations are done by this separate wing. That's in essence why you might have heard that mentioned. Izzadin al-Qassam Brigade, if you've ever heard that mentioned alongside it. A point to mention about its charter, 1988 charter, we will discuss this in the next part, but it's claimed that its charter is advocating for the genocide of Jews and massacre of Jews and so on and so forth as its aim, which we'll discuss in the next part, whether that's true or not. But I must point out that, as I said, whenever we investigate anything, we have to be absolutely factual about it, whether it's for or against any position that we hold. And of course, its stated objective in its charter is to create an Islamic state in Palestine where Jews, Christians, and Muslims can all coexist peacefully under Islamic law. This is what it says in one of its articles. So it's approaching not from a secular basis, but it doesn't mean that even if it's from a secular basis, that it must therefore be one of a genocidal, mass murdering political objective where it would kill all Jews in the whole world, which is what some Zionists say. So whether we disagree with Hamas or not, we have to be careful never to misrepresent anyone. At the same time, not misrepresent Zionists as either, as well, in what they say or what their their arguments or their political parties believe in. In 1988, now in this year, a lot of things are happening. The Arab League gives officially financial control they give financial control of the funds which it gives to the PLO. It gives them some authority. It then creates a Palestine it recognizes PLO as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinians, and kind of, in a sense, King Hussein just kind of flings on the West Bank onto the PLO's shoulders, saying, you know what, we renounce all claims to the West Bank. Now it's the PLO's concern. Now you deal with Israel, you negotiate with them, or you handle them. We're done with West Bank. So this is where the PLO both get more formal recognition from the Arab League in having some kind of finances, in having some kind of legal authority or representation behind all Palestinians. And this is also where you might see that Israel kind of sees the utility of Hamas, because Hamas thinks that the PLO basically don't represent all Palestinians and don't represent them because they're coming from a non-secular basis. So it's just an interesting point. This is where Jordan basically kind of doesn't care about West Bank anymore and says, you know, we give it over to the PLO as their concern. Syria hasn't given up on the Golan Heights, although Egypt did give up on Gaza as well. That's also important. I forgot to mention that they did give up on Gaza. They formally recognized in the peace treaty in the Camp David Accord that Gaza will be now the concern of the whatever Palestinian authority is there. So they both give up on those territories. 1980 to 93. We see the rise of the first Intifada. We're getting to now almost modern times, or recent times, should I say rather. Intifada means in Arabic to shake off. They were going to do mass demonstrations, protests, civil disobedience, and a bunch of other things. Unfortunately, of course, there was violence involved. And this leads to almost 2,000 Palestinians dead over 5 years, and 270 Israelis dead. This was due, of course, to the dissatisfaction at the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. The military regime that the Palestinians were ruled under, and the similar things that were happening now, maybe not as bad, but still they were denied self-determination, they were denied sovereignty in their own land, and therefore this was the reaction. 1994, you see a formal peace treaty between Jordan and Israel, normalization, recognition and agreement of the borders that you have today, minus the West Bank. The infamous Oslo Accords. Now this is a turning point for the PLO. The PLO had been using violent resistance as one of its many means, as well as political campaigning. It made an agreement with Israel. Some would say to the detriment of the Palestinians in the West Bank because of what was agreed, which we'll get to in a sec. But the Palestinians, in return for an offer of some withdrawal of the Israeli armies from areas in the West Bank, the PLO must recognize the right of the State of Israel to exist, and basically, which they never did before, and renounce the use of violent resistance.